Hello, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us in our very first activity, our very first event for the Asia Pacific Critical Realism Network. No? So I'm really happy to see a number of you who have joined us. We are now 26 here, and we're expecting a few more. But for the sake of time, perhaps it is best to already begin. So let me just introduce myself. I am Johnny Go. I'm from the Ateneo de Manila University here in Manila, no? And I will be the facilitator for today. So if I may just share my screen. Okay, so as you know, we organize this two-day activity called Study Circles, Clearing the Ground Study Circles. And for today, the focus will be clearing the ground of critical realism. And it'll be myself and MinGyu who will be the facilitator for today. I think what I just like to point out at this point is that I'll be talking about basic and original critical realism, while MinGyu will discuss the latest evolution of the critical realism of Roy Bhaskar, which is MetaReality. So for today, what we're hoping to do is sort of see the beginning and the culmination, in a sense, no, of critical realism, and hopefully we'll have a great discussion based on that. And then tomorrow, we will look into more the application of critical realism, especially in the social scientific research. And for that, we will have Ben Tihanki from the Philippines and Tony Schwingrud from Norway. Okay, but maybe as we start, I just want to say that maybe just a background of why we call these study circles, because usually the expectation is to have a conference, no? But we already have the usual conference. The International Association of Critical Realism holds a conference every year. In fact, this year it's going to be the first week of August at The Hague, no? So I hope to see some of you there. But I think the reason why we came up with the study circles is that some of us who are part of the network have expressed our preference just to gather together so we can clarify our understandings of the concepts of critical realism. No? And so what we would like to be able to do today, is to really ask our questions, think out loud among fellow students of critical realism, so we can learn together and in the process build our network here in Asia. No? We chose the topic clearing the ground because, as you know, Roy Bhaskar likes that phrase, a phrase that came from John Locke, because that's one of the value really of critical realism. It helps us to clarify our vocabulary, to clarify our thoughts so that we can pursue our research and our studies in a more consistent and integrated way. No? So Catherine has very kindly posted the link to the conference of the association. So please check out the link. No, you can click it now, but don't read it now, read it later. But we would like to strongly encourage everyone to consider attending this face-to-face conference at The Hague, but it's also a hybrid conference. Maybe I can invite Catherine at this point to just say a little bit about the conference, if that's okay, Catherine? Just a few words about the conference.
Sure. Thanks, Johnny. If you are interested, there's two things I'd like to say about the conference. The first is that the main conference, which is the 10th to the 12th of August, is in person in the Netherlands, but also online. So for a reduced rate, you can participate from home, which is great, including presenting papers. Abstracts were closing today, but it's just been extended by a week. So there's still an opportunity to put an abstract to the conference. But the second thing is that the 2 days prior to the conference is a pre-conference workshop where there'll be presentations by people about critical realism in the mornings. And then in the afternoons, the opportunity, if you're an early career critical realist, whether it's a PhD student or someone who's come to critical realism later in their research career, if you consider yourself to be an early career critical realist, you can also come to the pre-conference, have the lectures in the morning, but in the afternoon you can present work in progress and get feedback and have discussion about your projects with a cohort of people. So it's not the full conference, it's the pre-conference in a sort of more supportive environment. So I'd really recommend that if you're a student or if you're developing critical realist projects. And if you go to the website for the conference, you can find out more information about that.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you for that. So again, we'd like to strongly encourage you to sort of consider attending the conference, whether in person or virtually. No, okay. So let's move on. So I've talked about this. No, that today we will focus on the basics. No, it's a basics introduction refresher to clarify our concepts in basic critical realism. Unfortunately, we were unable to find someone who could talk about the dialectical critical realism. So we're skipping that, but we have MetaReality as well today. No? And then tomorrow, we're hoping to get concrete guidelines, suggestions for using critical realism as a toolbox, no? As a meta theory for research. Okay. So for today, it will be myself and MinGyu, no, talking. It's really the bookends, actually, when you think about it, of critical realism. So I'll be talking about original critical realism. I will make a brief presentation, and then MinGyu will talk about the latest evolution of critical realism in meta-reality. Now, the most important thing today will be the conversations that follow the presentations. The presentations are not meant to be comprehensive because we don't have enough time, but hopefully they will serve as provocations, no? As a springboard for conversation. So I will begin by talking about basic critical realism. While I'm speaking, if there are comments or questions, please feel free to type in the chat box. And Ito, who is assisting us today, no, one of the leaders of the network, can go through the questions and bring them up during the conversations later. Okay, so let me begin. So I thought today the best way to talk about critical realism really is instead of going through the entire thing, I just thought I'd focus on the topic. What was the appeal of critical realism for myself? No, when I first bumped into Roy Bhaskar, when I was taking up my doctorate in London, and he gave a talk to our class. No, why did the talk on critical realism drew me to a more in-depth study of critical realism? No, I think this slide sort of captures it for me. No. Before I encountered critical realism, I felt that I was caught between the devil and the blue sea, the deep blue sea. Meaning that there were two choices, but the two choices were not completely appealing to me. But the two choices were very problematic for me. The first one, of course, is positivism, where the focus is whatever is observable, whatever is measurable. As you know, this would be the unsophisticated philosophy of the sciences. That the gift that positivism brings is certainty, because we focus on something we can observe and even measure. But the problem that Roy Bhaskar pointed out in positivism is that it's reductionist. It reduces all of reality to only what is observable, to only what is perceptible. So that's a problem. And I think a lot of philosophers today, and hopefully social science researchers, already acknowledge that positivism is dated as a meta theory. What is a deep blue sea? What is the other extreme? The other extreme, of course, is relativism, in an extreme form of postmodernism. Relativism obviously is a reaction to positivism, but the beauty of relativism is that it acknowledges the limits of human knowing. That human knowing is subjective. It's always it's always perspectival. So it's limited in that sense. But my problem with relativism is that it has compromised thinking altogether. What do I mean by that? By acknowledging that we can never be certain about reality. Unfortunately, relativism has just said that everything's equally valid, right? And as we know, that's not really acceptable to many people, including myself. So I felt that I was caught between positivism and relativism, and critical realism for me was able to resolve most, if not all, of the problems I encountered. And I'd like to say a few words about that. So for me, there are basically four reasons why I like critical realism. And when I say critical realism, I'm really talking about the original basic critical realism only. I've studied dialectical critical realism as well as meta theory, but I focus my study really on basic critical realism, no? The philosophy of the sciences. Okay, so there are 4 reasons and 4 ideas, and I'd like to just go through them. For many of you, you've heard this before, no? That you know the concepts I'm talking about, but some of us are newcomers. Some of us are novices to critical realism. So it might be a good idea to get this particular to listen to this particular talk, no? And it may also be a refresher for the others, no? So what's the first one? So in terms of big ideas, in terms of summaries, no, I would say that the first one, the first idea that really appealed to me, no, is reality is independent of human knowing, no? And at the same time, human knowing is limited and relative. So these 2 statements always held together, no? And for those of us who are already familiar with critical realism, we will recognize that these 2 ideas are really captured in the terms that Roy Bhaskar came up with, that Roy Bhaskar coined, about intransitive, about reality being intransitive, no? And human knowing being transitive. Of course, when Roy Bhaskar talked about this in his first book, he was talking about the objects of scientific inquiry, no? Whatever we're studying in science, that's intransitive, no? And then science itself, the enterprise of science, is transitive. Now, what's great about this for me is that he came up also with what he called the holy trinity of critical realism, where he talks about judgmental rationality, no? And judgmental rationality is really a commitment to critical thinking, basically, you know? And this is made possible because of ontological realism, which basically means that reality is independent of human knowing. And critical thinking or judgmental rationality is made necessary because of epistemic relativism, which basically means human knowing is limited and relative, no? So the point that Roy Bhaskar makes, the brilliant point for me, that Roy Bhaskar makes in the seemingly simple idea, is that it is possible to make a judgment about reality because reality is independent of human knowing. And at the same time, it is necessary to make a judgment because human knowing is limited and relative, no? So for me, through this idea, what Bhaskar has done really is he has really subverted relativism, no? He has really sort of said that because of these ideas, if you subscribe to these ideas, then for sure relativism will not make sense to you. And for me, this is a very this was really an eye-opener when I was, studying critical realism. So for me, this is the first big idea and the first big reason why I like critical realism. Let me just check the chat box if there's anything there. Okay, so Ito will monitor the chat box, no? So that's the first one. If there's something I said that's not so clear and you have questions, please feel free to already type them in the chat box, okay? What would be the second idea? The second idea is that reality is more than what we can perceive, no? As I said earlier, positivism sort of reduced reality to only what we could perceive, no? And the way Bhaskar puts it is that reality includes not only our experiences, no, but reality also includes events which we haven't experienced or we will never experience, as well as causal structures, underlying causal structures, or which has been also called generative mechanisms, which are not actually working, which are not yet actualizing any event, no? So the distinction that Roy Bhaskar makes, no, among the 3 domains of reality: experiences, which he calls empirical; events, which he calls actual; and the causes, which he calls the real. For me, this was another eye-opener, no? Because a related idea to this, no? Of course, this is called stratification in critical realism, no? And a related idea to this is that reality is more than what's perceptible, no? But in actuality, reality is everything that is causally efficacious, anything that can make a difference, even if it's not yet making a difference, even if there's no effect yet, that would be real already, no? And clearly, this really debunks, no, positivism, no? Again, so for me, my dilemma between relativism and positivism, just from these two ideas, have been resolved by Roy Bhaskar in critical realism. That's why I found it very attractive even from the very beginning. No? So this would be the second idea. The third idea is about what happens outside the laboratory. No? And the best way I can summarize it is that outside the laboratory, causes do not always produce events or experiences because other causes can get in the way. No? Other causes can intervene. So in the laboratory, obviously, there's closure. So causes always have effects, right? Because the scientists make sure that that happens. But outside the laboratory, there is no closure. No? And the term that Bhaskar uses for this is the open system. No? The world is an open system. No? And for me, this is very interesting because remember what people always say in statistics, no? That correlation is not the same as causation. Basically, it has clarified for me why correlation is not causation. No? It's because through the concept of the open system, a distinction is made between causes, the actual causes of events or entities, no? Between causes on the one hand and conditions. No? So when we talk about correlation, we can actually just be talking about conditions. But if we really want to be able to explain a phenomenon, we have to be able to identify the causes. Now, what's, I think, important here about the idea of the open system is that it debunks another school of thought that's rather fashionable before and maybe even now, which is determinism. No? That we are all victims or, like puppets, no, of the laws of nature. Because there are laws of nature, automatically there will be effects. No? And obviously, it's an idea that's not appealing to me. And I'm happy that Roy Bhaskar came up with this idea of the open system because it helps me philosophically to debunk determinism. So that's the third big idea, no? That attracted me to critical realism. The final idea that attracted me to critical realism, no, is summarized this way. Complex causes are irreducible to more basic ones. No? So first of all, there's a recognition that there are more complex causes, no? And these causes cannot be reduced to the more basic ones. They are causally efficacious. No? They can actually have effects. No? And because they're causally efficacious, they are real. No? Now, I have a picture of a brain here. No? Because I think that's a very good example of this idea of emergence. No? Basically that, that consciousness, for example, is a complex cause. No? We should not reduce consciousness only to the brain. The mind should not just be reduced to the brain just because the mind is emergent from the brain. No? Something else is going on already in consciousness, which cannot be explained completely or explained away by the physical brain of the human person, okay? And that's something that I find very attractive as well, because an implication of this is that human agency makes a difference, no? That there's such a thing as human freedom, no? And as a Christian, of course, this is something that I subscribe to, that I believe in, and I'm happy that I found a kind of philosophy that supports it, a secular philosophy, a non-religious philosophy that supports human agency. No? And so what this final idea does is it debunks another school of thought, no? That is rather fashionable, which is reductionism. No? This penchant for reducing complex causes to their most basic atomic components. No? What Roy Bhaskar is saying is we shouldn't do that because, for example, another good example, which we will hear more about tomorrow, is society. Society is a complex cause. No? It cannot be reduced to the members of society, to the individuals who are members of the society. Social structures, no, are causally efficacious, they're powerful, they can make a difference, and they are real. No? So another way of putting that is that poverty is not the same as poor people. No? You cannot reduce poverty to poor people. There's something else going on in poverty that is causally efficacious. So this is the fourth idea that I found really powerful, really compelling, because it debunks this idea of reductionism. So in summary, I would say that these are the four reasons and four ideas why I fell in love with critical realism. No? So much so that I requested Roy Bhaskar to be my supervisor for my doctoral thesis. No? And so intransitivity, that reality is intransitive, it's independent of human knowing. It's not something mentally produced. No? Therefore, we cannot subscribe to relativism because of that. No? Reality is stratified, no? Because reality isn't just made of our experiences. Reality isn't just empirical, no? It's also actual and real. No? So that debunks positivism. Open system, there are causes that get in the way. So causes do not always automatically have effects. So that's against determinism. And finally, emergence, a recognition of the more complex causes, no, which debunks reductionism. So for me, these are the 4 reasons why I got into critical realism. Full disclosure, I'm a Catholic priest. So before, the only philosophy I could turn to support my views was Thomas Aquinas. No? But I stumbled over critical realism, a very well-respected philosophy of the sciences in its early beginnings, no? And it actually supports, no, my own views, my own beliefs in about the world. No? So as summarized by the 4 concepts here: intransitivity, stratification, open system, and emergence. Okay, so with that, I'd like to end my presentation, and I hope we can have some discussion, no, at this point. No? So let me just see. Okay. Hazuki's asking if it's okay to ask questions. Please go ahead. No? The chat box is a parallel universe to what we're doing here. And this is what happens in class anyway. People talk. So please go ahead and discuss over the chat box. But I wonder if you have questions or reactions to what I shared with you. No? My topic of the 4 reasons why I began studying critical realism. Your question may be clarificatory. No, I realized that I sort of gave a basic critical realism 101. No? So I'm sure I wasn't able to elaborate sufficiently. But if you have questions, if you have comments, please feel free to unmute yourself or raise your hand or type in the chat box.
Johnny, excuse me. Ben has a question. Browse up from Hazuki's question.
Okay, Ben, would you like to read your question?
Yes, allow me. I saw your slide where you put causal structures as the 3rd domain. So I post in the chat, I'm often confused why Bhaskar labeled the domain of reality where causal structures reside as the real, when the empirical and actual are also part of reality. Is it because it refers to the totality of the real?
That's a great question, no, Ben. I never thought of that, but let me see. The way, and please, I'd like to invite people to join in. No, the way I would answer that question is that usually the way I sort of represent the domains of realities, I have 3 circles. No, 3 circles. The smallest circle is empirical experiences. The second bigger circle is the actual or events. And the third biggest circle is the real. No? So as Ben correctly pointed out, the real includes the empirical and the actual. No? So I think that's the only reason why he called the 3rd domain the domain of the real, because it includes everything. No? It includes everything. So Ben, does that make sense?
Yeah, I just find it a bit difficult when explaining it to students, because when I refer to it as Bhaskar does as the real, it often doesn't communicate that we're talking about the parts of the real that contain the causal structures, which is why I find your explanation clearer, because you really said causal structures.
Thank you, Ben.
So it's more of a teaching challenge for me. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think these pedagogical issues are very important, because obviously we're all here to spread the gospel, right? We want, since if we believe in critical realism, we want to share it. And sometimes the classroom is a great forum for us to encounter issues which are not so clear, that maybe Bhaskar himself wasn't very clear about. So it's good to share, no? Okay. Would anyone else like to add to that discussion? Okay, Wilson, would you like to read your, Wilson, good to see you here. Would you like to read your question and explain a little bit?
Hello, Father Jenny. Hello, everyone. So my question is, epistemic relativism, by the name itself, shows that it's also a form of relativism. So I would like to ask if you could sharpen the distinction between the two. Can there be never an epistemic certainty, say for instance of faith, that what we know is true and reliable? So I'm thinking of the example that we are not being deceived by our mind or by our senses.
Okay, that's a great question also. So let me see. In his first book, Roy Bhaskar makes a distinction between epistemic relativism, which means that our knowing is relative, and judgmental relativism, no, which means that our conclusions are also relative, no. I think to sharpen the distinction between epistemic relativism and the relativism that I was criticizing, no, the relativism that Roy Bhaskar debunked is judgmental relativism, which means that because that particular philosophy does not acknowledge the independence of reality from human knowing, everything is relative. I think the brilliance of Roy Bhaskar is that he was able to contain relativism only to our knowing, no? So our knowing is relative, but reality is not relative. Reality is there. Reality is given. No? So that's why it's possible to make judgments, or it's possible to do critical thinking. Otherwise, we will all lapse into judgmental relativism. Does that make sense, Wilson?
Yes, Father. But just to give some follow-up questions. So can we never have then a certainty that what we know about reality out there is already reliable enough, or it's really reflective of what's the reality out there?
Okay, that's a very tricky question, no, Wilson, especially when you talk about faith, because your example is faith, right? I think it is okay to say reliability, but not certainty, no? Not certain, because I think the moment we talk about epistemic certainty, there's a kind of hubris there, no? That we already know for sure, right? Now, faith is a different question, because faith is not knowledge, no? Faith is obviously that's why we need faith, because knowledge is not adequate, no, for you to actually subscribe to a faith, no? So I would say that, you know, when we talk about judgmental rationality, Roy Bhaskar isn't saying it's not reliable. He's saying that given our best slides, this is the best account of reality so far. However, it's not the same as certainty, because it can be revised. It can be revised if there's new data or new ways of looking at things. We have to be open to revising our judgments, no? Our conclusions about reality. Ben, do you want to pitch in?
Yeah. I wonder if it's helpful, because this often arises when I also give talks on CR. If we premise it really that the basic critical realist model is a philosophy of science. So the domain really that we're talking about is science. And I think science, the way I like to frame it, does not really comment on matters of faith, because it cannot. So therefore, I think from the outset, basic critical realism really assumes as a core principle epistemic relativism, because of the limitation of human senses, human cognition, etc. So I guess the answer to Wilson's question is, within basic critical realism, I think there can be no epistemic certainty, as you have explained. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, thank you, Ben. That's helpful. I think the thing that I think Wilson is coming, Wilson was my student in critical realism before, no? I think where he's coming from is that we've sort of been audacious enough to say that critical realism, the epistemology of critical realism, can also apply to faith, no? But that's another story.
Okay.
Huh?
Yeah.
But that's
All right,
another
now I
story, and we
understand.
don't want to go into that. No, we're saying that maybe it's important for what we're saying is that we can actually extrapolate the epistemology of critical realism to include other fields beyond the physical and social sciences. Yusuke, would you like to add to the discussion? We can't hear you for some reason. Wait, so while you're still figuring that out, maybe I can call on Patch first. Patch, would you like to read your, yeah?
And good afternoon, Father Johnny. So, I'm also critical realist in a sense, and I was very strongly influenced by Dr. Ben when I took my MBA, and in my dissertation, I also tried to use critical realism in explaining systems viability. And in one of the things that fascinated me was the view of Father Bernard Lonergan on his work on insight, the general empirical method, and general cognition. So I wonder, since you're also a priest, what are your views on Lonergan's work on insight, and can we really relate it with Bhaskar's view of critical realism?
Oh, that's a great question, Patch. Actually, there is an article. I've encountered an article where there was a direct comparison between Lonergan and Roy Bhaskar. No, in fact, Lonergan also calls his philosophy critical realism, but it's not the same as Roy Bhaskar. There are certainly overlaps and compatibilities. Off the top of my mind, I'll just say that I think Lonergan focused a lot on epistemology, but Roy Bhaskar included the ontology. No? So Roy Bhaskar is saying this is the way we know because this is reality. But what Lonergan has done was really examine and talked about how we know. And he has a lot of he has really made a great contribution, no? In epistemology. Like I love his transcendental precepts, no? When he talks about we have to be attentive to experience, we have to be intelligent, no? And in our understanding, no? And then we have to be reasonable in our judgment, no? And then we have to be responsible in our action. So the two are compatible, but they're compatible, but I would say offhand that what I like about Bhaskar is that he provides the ontological rationale for the epistemology. No? Because there's ontological realism and there's epistemic relativism, then that's why we can know this way. Okay?
Thank you very much, Father John.
Would anyone like to add to that? Anyone Lonergan scholar here who would like, because I'm not a Lonergan scholar. He's also a Jesuit, but I've read him a little bit, but I wouldn't call myself an expert, no, in Lonergan. Okay, maybe we can go back to, who was it earlier?
Only Ben and
No, earlier somebody was having trouble
sorry.
with the microphone,
Yeah.
right? Who was that?
that's Yusuke. Yusuke, are you now there?
Oh, I think he left.
Okay.
That's okay. Any other question or comments? We still have a few minutes before we jump to MetaReality.
Father, if I may.
Yes, go ahead, Ito.
Yeah, this is following up Ben's point. So my question was, if I understood it correctly, Ben was saying, Ben, if you could correct me, you were saying that basic critical realism is essentially therefore founded on science, essentially, since it covers the epistemic relativism area, which, if I understood you correctly, you limited to just what our senses can access. And my question with regards to that is that what I understood was Bhaskar's teachings say that reality is, there's a part of reality, or reality is not exhausted by only what we can sense, no? So how do we, my question therefore is, how do we now know or delineate that part which we can say is accessible by our senses, and that part which is not accessible by our senses, is my question.
Okay, would anyone like to answer a challenging question from Ito? Anybody? Yes, Brendan,
After
please, go
Brendan,
ahead.
yeah.
So Brendan
Hello,
first, and then Ben.
I think it's not a case of what our senses can access as opposed to what our senses cannot access. It's more a case of what our senses cannot access yet. If you take, say, some kind of medical tool or some kind of scientific tool, that will extend the range of our senses into other aspects of reality that our physical senses, the sight, touch, hearing, etc., are not normally able to pick up on.
Okay, Brendan, thank you for that. Ben, did you want to say something?
Yes. Well, what I was explaining earlier, and this links also to what Brendan is saying, is that I think Bhaskar was just pushing epistemic relativism, because sciences do not depend on what is observable alone. Because hypotheses have always, even scientific hypotheses have always talked about unobservable things, like magnetism, for example, gravity. These are not directly observable. We only see their consequences. But Brendan makes an interesting point. If we have instruments that can somehow detect these unobservables, then they can be proxies of what we think is existing. So, but I think what Bhaskar proposes is retroduction, right? We use our imagination to think about those things that we cannot sense, but which accounts for what we see. That's my understanding.
Thank you, Ben. I think there are two very interesting ideas here, no? As a response to the question. The first is that some things cannot be perceived yet, but hopefully with technology, our perception will be extended and we'll be able to do so. For example, atoms. No? I mean, people sort of speculated about atoms using retroduction, as Ben was saying. No? And then finally, when the microscopes became more advanced, we were able to do that. No? But so that's one way of thinking about it. That you may believe that with enough advancement in science, everything is potentially perceptible. But there's another school of thought that says that some things in principle are not perceptible. No? And one of the examples for now is the black hole. No? As you know, I think a year or two ago, there was a famous breakthrough in astronomy where they were able to take a picture of the black hole. But scientists were quick to point out that the picture is not an image of the black hole because the black hole cannot be perceived. The image is actually an image of the effects of the black hole. No? So I think these are two things. Obviously, we don't know the answer, right? But we have to make a choice. So do you believe that everything is potentially, in principle, perceptible? No? It's just a question of, extending the capacity of human senses and knowing, no? Or would you also include, would you accept that some parts of reality are simply beyond our perception? No? But whatever is the case, critical realism still makes sense, and that's the beauty of it, I think. No? Okay. Would anyone like to add to that point before I comment on the question of Yusuke? Any thoughts about that? So I think it's important to ask ourselves, do you believe, because we can't prove it, right? It's not an empirical question. So do you prefer to believe that all of reality is potentially perceptible? It's just a question of time or technology? Or are you saying already that maybe some parts of reality are just beyond our perception? No, they may become events, but they may not actually, be perceptible. No, Personally, I actually go for the second one. Since I'm a religious person, I believe in spirits, and spirits are not perceptible. So I would, that's why I like critical realism, because it's able to help you think about your worldview, examine it, reflect on it, and actually evaluate and revise it if you want to. Okay, so whether you believe that everything is potentially perceptible or not, critical realism can make you sort of clarify, and help you defend that particular stance. Okay.
It was just a short comment, Father, about um, the existence or the possibility of reality of the real being not perceptible to human senses. So I am thinking it could be another form of reductionism, or it could actually contradict the first premise that you raised a while ago, that reality is independent from the human mind. So if we reduce reality to what is only perceptible to the human mind, or potentially perceptible to the human mind, then aren't we going back to that problem of reducing what is real to what is only subjective?
That's a very provocative question, the answer to which we do not know. So I think the beauty of critical realism is that, we begin to think of these questions, and we need to spend time thinking about them. No? So Wilson, I don't have an answer to your question. It's possible, no? But it's also, because in principle, it's possible for reality to be potentially perceptible, I think, no? But I don't believe in that. Because this is one of those questions where I think we have to make our choices, because it's not an empirical question, right? We don't know if in fact we will be able to experience everything, no? We don't know. For now, we can't, obviously, no? For now, there are things we don't, no? But you have to, I think we have to make a choice individually, given our own worldview, what to subscribe to. Okay. Okay, maybe the last question will be from Yusuke, no? Before we move to MinGyu. So may I request, Ito, can you please read Yusuke's question?
Yes, please. Yusuke was asking about emergence. Quote, I myself accept emergence, but sometimes confuse it with mysticism. Especially, he thinks that reductionism is strong in the philosophy of the mind. And his question, therefore, is, how do you explain reductionism, I think, simply emergence, simply and persuasively?
Okay, I don't know about simply. I don't know if you can explain it simply, but we have, among us here in this group, we have faculty, people who are teaching, no? So I'd love to hear from somebody who has taught emergence. Maybe we can share strategies on how to teach emergence, no? Anyone? And would anyone like to just mention an experience, or how you try to teach emergence in your classes, or how you try to explain emergence to your colleagues? We have an expert on Norwegian school system, educational system here among us, Tone. So I don't know, would you like, sorry for putting you on the spot, but would you like to say something in response to that question? How would you explain emergence, especially as an expert of structures in education, no?
No, but the classical example of an emergence is water. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes,
we
can.
Yeah. It's the water, isn't it? Because it consists of oxygen and hydrogen, and both are inflammable gases, while water can extinguish fire. It's got a new property. So that's the old example from John Locke.
Okay, so I think that's quite
very
brilliant.
Simple.
Yeah. Thank you for that. What else? Go ahead. Tony, would you like to add? Are you finished?
Yeah, I'm finished.
Okay, thank you so much for that. It's okay. I hope that's helpful. It's a very simple example, but I think very, very graphic in the sense that water, the emergent new reality,
Quality.
has completely different qualities from hydrogen and oxygen. No? In fact, it's the opposite. No? We have here somebody who talks about Fryer. Sorry, there's something wrong with my chat. I can't read the name.
Hazuki. Hazuki
Okay.
Kajiwara. Sorry.
Suki,
was
would
the
you
one
like to
asking.
say something about your question about Fryer?
It's not question, but Fryer says it's very complicated to explain 3 domains. So he suggests, how about just focus on when we conducting actual research, we should focus on just people's experience and event and causal mechanism, he said. But I think that 3 domains perception is very key in CR. So I don't agree with him, but it is very interesting discussion. So I will share here.
Well, thank you for bringing that up. I didn't know about that, but yeah, it's and I think as students and teachers, we do know that we have a choice. No, if we feel that, these concepts are meant to clarify, they're meant to, explain things and make the ideas accessible. No, I don't agree with Fryer either. I think the 3 domains are helpful, but I think as teachers or as students of critical realism, we can decide how we want to go about it. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. No? Yeah, Yusuke, in response to Tone, is saying that the water as an example is easy to understand because it's physical, no? But when it comes to the mind or something invisible, it's difficult to explain. No? Yeah, and of course I agree. That's also true. No? But another example would be society. No? The structures in society, like poverty, is well, it's not invisible, but poverty is a reality, but it's not the same as the poor people. So like the classic bias explanation for poverty is that poor people are lazy. No? But we do know that laziness is not the only reason or not the most important reason for poverty. No? There are structures that create that. Catherine, would you like to say something? You have your hand raised.
Sure. 2 points. The first thing is about the Fryer article, which is on the Critical Realism Network blog page, is I think it makes everything in critical realism easier to explain when we do it through examples rather than necessarily using the labels in the first instance. So if you say to someone, lots of things happen in the world, but we only see a small proportion of them, people get that. You don't have to have said the specific layers of reality that Bhaskar talks about in the first instance. And if we say, lots of things happen in the world, but we don't necessarily, we don't see all of the causal mechanisms that are making them happen. And you can use, gravity, you can use all sorts of things as examples of that. We see the impacts, but we don't see the thing itself. I think that also makes sense to people. So before you start talking about the real, the actual, and the empirical, you can actually set up something that's much more concrete for people to understand. That's the first thing. The second thing, I wanted to give a social world example of emergence, which again is another way of kind of trying to make something more concrete. So I've just been working on some papers about why older women in Australia are increasingly becoming homeless for the first time in later life. And the core mechanisms are to do with their gender as women and also their age. But when you look at how gender and age combine and produce a new social structure that is an intersection of gender and age, the qualities of that social structure, the way it works, the kinds of mechanisms that you see operating in the world are actually different to just gender or just age on their own. So you can kind of think about how gender works, you can think about how age works, but when you put them together in this context, you see a very different structure when you try to understand the nature of it, and you see very different kinds of mechanisms operating in different kinds of contexts and in different kinds of conjunctions with other mechanisms. And so you can see they're not the same. You can't just reduce it to gender and age on its own. Something new has happened. And I think also it helps to think in terms of social stratification, the way that things change as you progress through those different levels of social stratification, and that when you then look down, I know down and up is problematic with stratification anyway, but if you think of how things combine to form new phenomena, when you try to uncouple how that phenomena is in terms of its nature and is in terms of the mechanisms that are then associated with that structure, you can't do it. And because the new thing is emergent from the other things. They're not just additive.
Okay, thank you so much, Catherine, for that example. I think the very concrete example that you shared about the intersection or interaction between age and gender it really helps explain it. No? Ben, did you have your hand raised? Did you want to say something before we move to MinGyu?
Yeah, just very quickly, because Catherine already clarified my point. But in business organizations, especially, we always say that the organization is really emergent. It's not just the members, it's not just the buildings, it's not just the financial assets. It's a totality that emerges from all of these elements. And the reason this is important for us is because in business, people often equate the organization with a financial statement, which is a very, very poor approximation of what the business is. But when they focus on the financial statement, all sorts of problems arise because many realities in the business are not captured by the financial statement. And yet members of the public, investors always attribute properties to the organization through the financial statement. So it's reductionism in its worst sense. So I think organizations would be a good example. I just wanted to quickly comment on the Fryer article because this relates to my question earlier about looking at the total set of the real and then the actual and empirical as subsets, whereas Fryer makes the point that just for clarity, we can explain them as separate subdomains. But I think that misses the point that actually the real domain captures everything. But I think, yeah, for exposition, for explanation, there is advantage in explaining each layer as if they were separate. But in reality, I think Bhaskar is saying the real encapsulates everything. So I think we have to find a simpler way to explain the domains, but speak to Fryer's point about simplicity in explaining. Those were just the 2 points I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. And just to support what Ben said, the main idea for me from stratification is that reality is beyond the horizon of the empirical. No? So the idea is that reality is being, our sense of reality is enriched, no? Through the concept of stratification. Okay. Okay, I'd like to thank everyone. What a great discussion. I mean, I didn't expect that much discussion, but I think it was very helpful for all of us. We were able to clarify certain gray areas and, you know, some dilemmas remain, but that's exactly what philosophizing is all about, no? So,
Father Johnny, I'm seeing the hand of Angelo. Is he still trying to raise a point?
Oh, sorry, Ajap. Angelo, do you want to say something? Sorry, I missed
okay.
your...
Sorry.
Good to see you.
Hello, Father. So I would just want to add to the discussion regarding regarding emergence, building from our concern, our shared concern of how to explain and even teach emergence. So I was once a chemistry teacher, so this very idea of emergence is actually very applicable to our field, because it would always seem that the properties of the compounds that we form from elements and other compounds don't have the same properties as the reactants. That's this particular idea, just coming from the example of Tony about water, it's very applicable and very acceptable to, at least for the more complex sciences beyond physics, no, beyond the physical. And my other comment, because my other foot is in philosophy, so I would just want to comment on what Yusuke said about philosophy of mind. Based on the little I know there, it seems that even the standard reductionism is very much in question in that field. And I've read up on some philosophers of science who talk about mind matters also, that there's this thesis that they call the multiple realizability thesis, right? Where we know where mental states don't actually map out physiological states and vice versa. So like, for example, a simple experience of pain could actually be the cause of several neurons or several neural fibers firing. So I'm not that familiar with philosophy of mind, but my guess of the lay of the land is reductionism is very much in question in that field and in philosophy of science in general. So I think in that sense, even within the within certain fields beyond CR, reductionism is very much in question. So that's just my 2 cents worth of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Far from 2 cents worth. Thank you for that valuable contribution. Okay, I know there might be more questions and comments, but for the sake of time, I think it's time now to move to the latest evolution of critical realism, which is MetaReality. And for that, we have an expert. We have MinGyu. So MinGyu, if you're ready.
Yes, I'm ready. First of all, I want to show my presentation PowerPoint first. Okay, hello everyone. My name is MinGyu. So from South Korea. I teach philosophy in liberal arts college in Korean University, South Korea. In this page, you can show the first. Okay, I'm the author of the Reality and Self-Realization, and this presentation will be the summarization of my book. All right. The first thing that I wanted to talk about is what is real in critical realism. As Johnny already said in earlier work of Roy Pascal's, I think the main point of the critical realism is about understanding the structured intransitive, I think. So in this slide, in this slide, I highlight the concept of structured and intransitive because the real objects is not just about events or the occurrence that we can perceive. It's about the generative mechanisms that manifest in tendencies. So that's the main point in earlier critical realism, as Pascal mentioned. So it is very important to understand then what is the structured and what is the intransitive. The structured because it is the activities of mechanisms and causal structures. And it is intransitive because it's independently of men, human beings. So in earlier work of critical realism, Roy Pascal emphasized the reality as structured intransitive. Then now I wanted to talk about the role of MetaReality in critical realism. If critical realism shows what is real, the structured intransitive, and why anthropocentrism is a problem in that approach, then the MetaReality, the latest part of the Roy Pascal's philosophy of reality, reveals the way we realize it without anthropocentrism. So the difference between earlier critical realism and MetaReality is this. Earlier critical realism is what is real, but MetaReality is the way we realize the reality. So the last part of this page is I quote from Roy Pascal's own sayings. Roy Pascal said, if critical realism is about thinking being, then meta-reality is about being, or rather, is about becoming of our being, the realization of ourselves, so to speak, self-realization. So the main concept we must see in meta-reality is about self-realization. Self-realization is defined as transcending into the realm of non-duality. The realm of non-duality is the realm of the real, not just actual or not just experiential. So transcending into the realm of non-duality is very important to totally understand or totally perceive or totally be with the reality itself. So Pascal said in meta-reality, that is the way we realize ourselves. We move from dualism to non-duality. So this is the latest approach to reality by Roy Pascal. So he said in his books, the Westerners overestimate the ability of the human reason. So we commit two fallacies. The first is epistemic fallacy, reduction of being to its scientific knowledge. And the second thing is anthropic fallacy, the exegesis of being in terms of human being. So these two fallacies make us misidentify of truth with dualistic reality. So the underlying reality, which is the meta-reality, is neither the object of rational judgment nor the object of empirical perception, but it can be approached when we overcome the subject-objective dualism. So that is why Pascal calls the meta-reality and self-realization level, and why Pascal calls the meta-reality as the level of the constellational identification. Okay, now you can see the book of reflection of meta-reality, and in that book, Pascal mentioned about the very interesting thing about the meta-reality. So transcendental moment of subject-objective identification is very important. It's a deep point of the reality. And that is the moment of scientific, artistic, and social discovery. As you mentioned about the scientific reality and social reality as society, mechanism, and organization. And also Pascal also said about the artistic moment also has the level of the meta-reality. Here I quote, so Leonardo da Vinci in painting and so predicting the nature and dynamics of light achieved transcendental identification with the alethic truth of flying. Alethic truth means the deep truth, deep level of the truth. Or Isaac Newton achieved transcendental identification with the alethic truth of gravity. Gravity itself, we cannot perceive, but we can perceive the effect of gravity, right? So alethic truth of gravity can be shown us as a subjective object identification. So that's why the Pascal talks about the self-realization in his meta-reality latest philosophy of critical realism. Okay, the next book of meta-reality is this. You can see this, Meta-Reality, Creativity, Love, and Freedom. In this book, Pascal tried to develop the concept of self. So he makes the level of the self, or he wanted to systemize the self. So in this book, Roy Pascal talks about the transcendent, the real self, and ego, and the limited embodied personality as a level of the actual, level of the experiencer, and level of the real. Like that, Pascal also systemized the self in this book. So the transcendent real self is very deep point, and in the point of the self, we share something. Okay, we share something. We share with the nature. We share with the people out there. We share with the other creatures in reality. So turn to identity, from turning to the earlier critical realism to the meta-reality means the turning from duality and duality to identity. And this turning to identity can be elaborated by an analysis of the self. That is the important point by the Roy Pascal, and elaborating a tripartite schema of dualism, duality, and non-duality. Pascal correspondingly analyzes the self into ego, the embodied personality, and the transcendent real self. So, important thing is the last one, right? Transcendent real self. And that is the source of their causal agents and powers. And such selves are unlimited and absolute realities. Reality is open. We can create many things. We can perceive very little things we can create. Because what we think we are is a mixture of the illusory ego, a real but limited embodied personality, and an absolute, unlimited, transcendent real being. For the most part, occluded and dominated by the realities which depends on it. So, attainment of the truth at the level of the meta-reality, Pascal calls this alethic truth. So the attainment of the truth at the level of the meta-reality shares the misidentification of ourselves. We just think we are just ego or embodied personality, but we must know that, or we must reveal, we have a deep truth of the self, which is the transcendently real self. And Pascal also calls that as the ground state of the reality. In ground state of the reality, we have a big self, including reality self. So that is the Roy Pascal main point in meta-reality, I think. Okay, that's what I prepared for today's conversation. Okay, and I wanted to discuss with you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, MinGyu. So now MinGyu has given us an overview of the most important concepts of meta-reality. So please feel free again to unmute yourself to share your comments or questions, or type them in the chat box. Okay, Brendan, please go ahead.
Hello, MinGyu. Thank you very much for that. I struggle with meta-reality. I find it quite hard to read. Thank you for clarifying some bits. I'm curious, how do you think you would apply meta-reality or the concepts in meta-reality to social research?
Social research?
Yes.
Basically, by Roy Pascal, I think in the level of the meta-reality, we can talk about why solidarity or why love and why struggling in social phenomena, social environment is important. I think that's the point of the Roy Pascal's meta-reality. Meta-reality try to achieve the emancipation, the role of the emancipation. Do you understand?
A little, yeah. I was just about to ask you if that was related
That's why
to.
Pascal emphasized the level of the non-duality, identification, constellational identification level must be reside in the deep level of the meta-reality. That would be my answer for you.
Yep. No, thank you.
Ben, go ahead.
Yeah, this is also a response to Brendan. If we look at management as applied social science research, what I pick up from MinGyu's explanation of meta-reality is if business leaders do not falsely consider themselves as separate from other stakeholders of the organization, which sometimes happens, right? Businesses see themselves as separate from customers, from suppliers, or even from the environment, when actually they are part of one unified whole, and they are best conceived as growing together or flourishing together to be the best versions of themselves. So it's the reduction of the business idea to being either a corporate entity or a separate entity from the rest that is problematic, which is why in applied management now we're trying to fix these artificial divisions that have arisen because of certain conceptions of the business. So this is a real challenge, but I think what meta-reality gives is a motivation to go back to solidarity. That really what affects one affects the other, and we need to stop thinking of these stakeholders as separate, but their fates are actually intertwined. So I don't know if that makes sense, Brendan. But my question for MinGyu earlier was his slide on. He had this slide on the structure, and I think this is also a constant question in my mind. When it says what is real in critical realism, he had this slide, MinGyu, right? And you point out that Bhaskar is saying what is real is structured. And then there's a clause that says it's not the occurrence of events. So is the negative really due to Bhaskar? He said not the occurrence of events, because this is a confusing point for me, because earlier we were trying to arrive at the idea that actually events are also real because they also have causal powers, right? Or is Bhaskar saying that it is not the event itself that has causal power, but always the structures? So that's why I'm going on this infinite loop whether events and experiences are real, because he defines events, he defines what is real as having the power to make a difference. But don't events make a difference also? But this is more a definitional question, MinGyu, based on your slide earlier. On the one entitled, What is Real in Critical Realism?
Yes, as I understand the word Pascal's critical realism, how can I say that I believe that what we as a human being, what we perceive is just events or the occurrence or the efficiency of the causality. So the causality itself, like the gravity or like the mechanism itself can be perceived by human beings, but we know that the mechanism exists, So we can feel or we can perceive, or how can I say that we know that we confirm that there must be some mechanisms underlying there. But what we perceive, what we can what we can actualize must be just the events of the occurrence. So that's what I understand about Roy Basker's critical realism.
And,
Why?
and MinGyu, so
Yes.
the not, if you show the previous slide here, if you
Yeah.
may, the slide before. So I'm trying to understand the not there, the qualifier, not the occurrence of events. So that is not to say that events are not real, right?
No. Events also real.
All right, thank you. That clarifies. I was
also
just I was just distracted by the not.
real.
Back to you, Johnny.
Pascal wanted to schematize the level of the reality. So what I wanted to talk about is the deeper level of the reality.
Understood. Understood.
Maybe we can invite Patch to read the. Oh wait, is it about MetaReality? Yes. Patch, would you like to read your question? Read out your question on self-realization.
Okay. So I have a question to Professor MinGyu on you had a slide on self-realization, particularly about the transcendental real self. And what really stood out to me was the phrase, an absolute unlimited transcendentally real being, which I also pasted in the chat. So what does this mean? My initial understanding, does this point to a person's, shall we say, unlimited or infinite potential for development? Kind of similar to the concept of integral human development. Yeah, the one in the second bullet. So I'd like to know more about your thoughts on that phrase. The absolute unlimited transcendental real being. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah. Right. Pascal said that the level of the transcendent real self, we have unlimited and absolute realities. So in this concept, I wanna say that our ability is potential, right? We can create many reality, social reality. We cannot create the nature itself, but we can create so many things. For example, every time we create the nowadays we create digital contents or data, right? So our ability is potential and it's unlimited, I think. The nature also unlimited, but we can actualize the reality very little, very just the top of the reality, right? So reality itself is unlimited and absolute, and we can go to the reality with the transcendent real self. That's what I mean here.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think listening from you, what I'm also getting might be relevant as well to the way we live our digital lives. In a sense, the way I'm interpreting the way we live our digital lives, we create profiles in different social media platforms, and that might point to that unlimited directions or paths that we could take towards defining ourselves. So thank you very much. I'm also continuing to reflect on this matter because recently I'm more interested about understanding well-being in the context of humanistic management. So I think this points towards many great provocations or reflection questions. Thank you very much.
As Johnny mentioned about the reality itself, so the reality is the open system, and in this open system, we can create unlimited things. I believe we can go through the unlimited future. Like, for example, we have the age of the artificial intelligence, right? So we create tons of the new things nowadays. So in that sense, I think our reality or our self is unlimited, has unlimited capacity, I think.
Okay, other comments or questions you might have?
I have a question.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, MinGyu spoke earlier about non-duality. Oh, there, it's in the slide. I've always found this a very challenging concept. What is a good, simple way of explaining this, MinGyu? It appeals to me as a concept, but teaching it is very difficult. Any tips?
Sorry, do you want to
Non-duality.
non-duality, right?
And I'm wondering whether this is the reason many critical realists who believe the basic critical realism do not venture into MetaReality because of non-duality. Is that one of the reasons?
Yes. As I understand Roy Pascal's critical realism, we have when we, for example, when you talk with other people or when we educate students, we have a different moment, I think. We have the moment of dualism, and we have also moment of the duality, and also we must have the moment of non-duality. So when we achieve the level of the moment of non-duality, Pascal emphasized that we achieve the goal, the last goal of the reality between other people, I think. So Pascal do not say about we do not have the moment of the realism, dualism or non-duality. Pascal also include the moment of dualism and duality. But Pascal tried to emphasize the last moment, which is very important to realize a self or realize the reality. It's the non-dual moment, I think. Can I answer you, Ben?
Yeah, I think I appreciate the concept. The challenge is explain. So when you speak of moments, this is like a process that the person goes through, right? So when he first thinks in dualisms, then he evolves, and until he reaches a point of non-duality, where then he acknowledges his connection with the rest of reality. I'm just thinking how to teach that to business students. But as I said, this is something roughly we're trying to approximate with stakeholder thinking, that businesses are connected with everyone. And we did see this during the pandemic, that businesses could not survive without the rest of the community. So, but it's still a challenge. And I'm wondering why some critical realists are very adamant that they don't want to go into meta-reality. It's like, is it a conceptual barrier, or do they reject the premise of non-duality? What's your take on that?
Most of the critical realists talks about the difference between how can I say that in the earlier critical realism, Roy Pascal emphasized the concept of non-duality. But in the latest part, in MetaReality, Roy Pascal goes return to identification from the non-duality, from the duality to non-duality, from the dualism and from the duality to non-duality. Most of the earlier critical realists do not want to go back to the identification. But Roy Pascal criticized that he did not want to go back to the Western philosophers' identification. So he tried to identify his identification as constellational identification, which means in that identification, he tried to include the level of the duality, also in the identification system. Did I answer you?
Yeah. So I can see why that would be a tough sell for a Western educated critical realism. Thank you.
Sorry for my poor English.
I think I understand.
Yeah, you're doing very well, MinGyu. Don't worry about the English. But the ideas are really complicated, so it takes time to wrap our minds around, especially meta-reality, you know? I think Angelo has a question. Is that right, Angelo?
Actually, I was just prompted by Ito to raise this question, which I think I sent via email when there was a round of being asked of us in the network being asked about what would be our questions, no, that we can bring up to this gathering. So the question I sent before via email, I think it's to bring another set of disciplines now, right? We've been talking about how can we apply meta-reality to our respective disciplines, but now I think I can also bring in those who are in theology and of course scholars of religion, and I think we have some theologians in the audience. So the question I would want to ask, I'm not sure if it could be asked in a very simple way or there's a simple answer to my concern, is how does this so-called spiritual turn of Roy Bhaskar interface or relate with the literature on critical realism being applied to religious matters? I think there have been many books published on that end, and I think Father Johnny is one of those people who have published on the relation. And I think we've also talked about the example of faith earlier. So like if we take that phrase seriously, Bhaskar's so-called turn to spirituality, can we relate his phase of meta-reality to what have scholars been thinking about in terms of the relation between CR and religious matters? Of course, going beyond organized religion, but maybe other kinds of spiritualities. So yes.
Yes, Bhaskar does not have a typical religious point, but he wanted to discover also the deeper level of the religion itself. So in each religion, as I say, for example, the Buddhism in Asia, Buddhism, Confucianism, and Taoism, and also in the Western religion, the Pascal wanted to reveal what is the deeper level of each religion. So there will be a relative part of the religion. Also, there will be the fundamental part of the religion. So that's what Roy Bhaskar wanted to discover about the religion with his meta-reality level.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments for MinGyu about meta-reality? MinGyu, actually, I have a question for you, no? And it's kind of connected to my own talk. I was wondering what attracted you to meta-reality, because as Ben mentioned, or who was it? Was it Ben or Brendan who mentioned that a lot of people are worried about going to meta-reality? But what attracted you enough to actually publish a book, no, and to teach about it. Would you like to share a little bit? No, if you can share why you like MetaReality, why you studied MetaReality, because many critical realists have not done that or did not want to do that, no?
I think the philosophy must go over just the science, I think. I'm a philosopher, not a scientist, right? I wanted to cover science and religion and social phenomena, and also the artistic activity also. I wanted to talk about, or I wanted to cover all of the things in this reality. And that's why I just wanted to reside in the earlier critical realism. And also so that's why I just follow Roy Basker's early critical realism to the latest part. And I believe that in the latest part, I totally, deeply understand Roy Basker's philosophy. Maybe I don't believe that when we just stay in the earlier part of the critical realism, I do not think that we can understand Roy Basker's philosophy perfectly. That's why I focus on the meta-reality. Did I answer you?
Yes, thank you, MinGyu. I think you're absolutely right. No, if we want to really appreciate the philosophy of Roy Bhaskar, we have to really look at the evolution of his thought, no, which of course culminated in MetaReality. But just to add, I just find it interesting because I myself felt that basic critical realism provided enough conceptual tools even to deal with questions outside science. So that's another approach. No? But I also appreciate yours, which is to be able to go beyond science, to actually follow the growth and development of his philosophy all the way to MetaReality. So thank you very much. No? Yes, there's room for one more question. Denver, please go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon, Denver here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, all right, wonderful. So I came in kind of late, but as we started discussing about MetaReality, it's really a new word for me, having done some readings also in critical realism. I'm curious now because my take based on the discussion and the question and answer was that MetaReality is like some sort of an even more foundational reality and an understanding of the layered structure of reality, you know, the actual, the real, etc. How is this in a way different? I'm trying to find a way in my mind to analogize or this concept. How is this in any way different or similar to this? How do you call that? This Aristotelian Thomistic concept of the esse or the act of being, which is like it's what binds all other realities together, right? This concept of the act of being. How is this fundamentally different, maybe, or how is this similar to the concept of a meta-reality?
I'm sorry, what you mean by Aristotle's what? I didn't.
I'm trying to fathom the concept of meta-reality. I'm trying to understand it, and I was wondering if there is any similarity or what the similarity would be or difference from this concept of act of being. I mean, metaphysics, or in metaphysics. I'm looking for another word right now in my mind. Yeah, but that's I'm trying to grasp the idea of meta-reality, and I'm trying to find a way to analogize it in my head in terms of other things that I already know.
Yeah.
Does my question make sense?
Yeah, sure. In meta-reality, Roy Bhaskar mentioned about the level of the alethic truth. Do you know what alethic truth? Alethic truth means that how can I say that? It's from the Heidegger's philosophy, alethic truth, and also it's from the Western ancient philosophy. So I think the Roy Bhaskar's meta-reality try to develop or try to more systemize the tradition of analytic truth in Western philosophy. That's
Okay.
what I can say now. Yeah.
Okay, I think it's a little bit clearer. Okay,
Yeah.
okay, I think you mentioned that in one slide, right? About the analytic truths.
Yes, right.
Yes, yes, yes. I will just go back to that on the recording then. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ito has posted a reading, no, that you may want to look into, no, when on the alethic truth. Okay. Mohammed, would you like to read out your question about reality and truth?
Hello?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I have a question. Some say, some criticalists. I think Pak Joni said in your presentation that there is real but not true. What it means, and how we know that that's true or false.
Excuse me, Mohammed, which presentation are you talking about? The one I presented today?
Hello?
Are you referring to the presentation today or some other presentation?
Yeah, sometimes I remember your presentation, but I want to clarify this.
Father Johnny, I believe he's referring to your YouTube presentation.
Okay, so
where you explain the difference between what is true and what is real.
Okay, so MinGyu, just indulge me. I'll just explain that. Basically, if the idea there, Mohammed, is that if you were here at my earlier presentation when I was talking about basic critical realism, I said that reality is not so much what's perceptible, but what can actually be causally efficacious. So something that can make a difference, can have an effect, no? So so many people conflate reality and truth, but for Bhaskar, that conflation is to be avoided. And the reason is what is not true can have an effect, as we know from fake news, no? So what is false is also real because it can have an effect. That's the point I was trying to make in a previous presentation. Is that helpful, Mohammed?
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead, MinGyu. Would you like to add anything, MinGyu?
Yes, in MetaReality level, in the latest philosophy of Roy Bhaskar, I think the reality in earlier critical realism, the concept of reality moved to the concept of the truth, because because the as I understand, the Roy Bhaskar wanted to include the earlier reality in his meta-reality. So that's why in meta-reality books, there is the concept of truth, not the reality, just the reality. So in the concept of truth, Bhaskar believed that he can cover all of the reality, and it can cover the beyond or behind or the meta level of the reality. That's why Bhaskar used the concept of the truth in latest meta-reality, latest critical realism, which is meta-reality. Did I answer you?
Okay, thank you. I think we have time for one more question or comment. Okay, if there are no more questions or comments, we'd like to thank MinGyu. Thank you for your presentation on MetaReality. It's really a very interesting topic because very few of us are, familiar with MetaReality, and I think your presentation was an excellent introduction and overview for us. No, so hopefully we have been provoked to our curiosity has been provoked, and we will do as MinGyu has done, no? Which is to study the philosophy of Roy Bhaskar until its culmination in MetaReality. No, so it's almost 5, and we don't have to wait till 5. No, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. We had about 26, I think, at the most, no, when everybody was here. I just like to remind you that tomorrow we have part 2, no, part 2 of our study circle. And for tomorrow, we have Ben Tihanki and Tony Skillingrod, who will talk about the application of critical realism, no? Especially on social scientific research. So I hope you will join us tomorrow. No? I also want to just say that the recordings will be made available on our Facebook page. Ito, perhaps we can put the link to the Facebook page, no, and the website. So for those of you who would like to review some of the discussions or to share the recording with people, colleagues who are also interested in critical realism, please feel free to do so. The video should be up by tomorrow morning. No? So on that note, I'd like to thank everyone. I'd like to thank Ito for organizing this also, and I'd like to thank MinGyu in a special way for his presentation. So let's give ourselves all a virtual round of applause, no, by by choosing that icon. And I'd like to thank you, and I hope you will join us again tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye,
Take care.
everyone. Thank you, Father.
Much. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.